Is Her Montecito Majesty really maintaining that the Hollywood Reporter's investigation into her alleged brutal bullying of staff was all lies?
They lie all the time. Nothing they ever say seems to stand up to reasonable scrutiny.
She's a bully.
She's referring to the tales of bullying at the palace during her brief tenure as a working royal in the UK.
This also follows all the stories about her bullying staff over here in the UK.
Playing the victim card, lashing out at all those horrible lies that all those nasty people tell about her.
I thought you'd been telling your truth, which is often a pack of lies.
Meghan Markle, meet the truth. Truth, meet Meghan Markle. I don't think you know each other. In fact, I fear that you're complete strangers.
She pushed too far again. Now royal insiders say the palace is done staying quiet, and Meghan Markle may finally be facing the consequences she never thought would come.
Major breaking news out of London. Buckingham Palace announcing Harry and Meghan will no longer receive public funds and they will stop using their royal titles.
For years, Meghan Markle has controlled the narrative, playing victim, rewriting history, and dodging accountability with carefully crafted PR. But behind the scenes, palace sources claim patience has run out. A major reveal could be just days away. And if what's coming is even half as serious as insiders suggest, Meghan's carefully polished image may not survive it. What exactly is about to be revealed, and why now? The answer could change everything.
Her awful antics were reported in an email to the late Queen, who ordered a full, external, independent legal probe, the results of which have never been published, but may well be if Meghan doesn't let it drop.
So it's no surprise to people who work at Buckingham Palace. They saw and witnessed all this here.
They've played nice for years. Too nice, some might say. The palace, traditionally mute on scandal, has absorbed wave after wave of Meghan Markle's public grievances with barely a raised brow. But this week, the atmosphere inside those gilded royal halls feels palpably different. The tone isn't cold, it's clinical, strategic. Because if insider whispers are true, the palace may be days away from doing something it never does, speaking out, not through a press release or a veiled comment, but through something deeper and far more permanent. Sources say the tipping point has finally arrived, that a long-suppressed dossier could be coming to light. And if it does, Meghan Markle might not be able to spin, rebrand, or manifest her way out of it. So what changed? Why now?
Talking of podcasts, Ms. Markle also told Emma that she's resting Confessions of a Female Founder. Resting? Resting as in rest in peace.
It turns out this silence wasn't about kindness, it was about timing. And for the royals, timing is everything. The Queen is gone. Charles is consolidating. William and Kate are more powerful than ever. The institution is restabilizing. And Meghan's constant need to poke the monarchy with a stick, from Oprah to archetypes, to this latest podcast mess, has finally worn out any goodwill that may have lingered. According to one source close to Kensington, they've given her rope. Now they're watching her hang herself with it. And the irony? Meghan, who built an entire brand on controlling her own narrative, may have walked right into her own undoing. Because in trying to reclaim her story, she reopened wounds the palace had quietly chosen not to dissect until now. Multiple insiders allege that if this next move goes public, it won't be a splashy headline. It'll be a surgical strike. Precise, devastating, and impossible to recover from. But that was just the beginning, because Meghan's biggest fear, it's not just losing public favor, it's the one buried report she hoped the world would never see.
There are growing calls to strip Harry and Meghan of their royal titles. The New York Post is reporting that locals in the UK say enough is enough.
There's a reason Meghan Markle panicked when The Hollywood Reporter and Vanity Fair dropped their bombshells. These weren't random gossip columns. These were deep investigative pieces, meticulously sourced, painfully detailed, and allegedly backed by more than a dozen staffers who had once worked under Meghan during her short-lived royal stint. Both articles painted the same picture: a woman obsessed with image, intolerant of dissent, and allegedly ruthless behind closed doors. And yet, she dismissed it all. Lies, she claimed. Misogyny, jealousy. But palace insiders say privately, she was furious, and far more worried than she let on. Because what the public doesn't realize is that these stories didn't appear out of thin air. They mirrored private complaints that had already been filed internally, and that reportedly made it all the way to the Queen. It was those very complaints that sparked a formal investigation, not a casual HR memo. a full independent legal review, authorized at the highest levels of the royal household. And while Meghan has always painted herself as the target of British cruelty, these reports tell a different story entirely.
William is reportedly formulating a plan to finally strip Prince Harry and Meghan Markle of their HRH titles.
Back to the truth, something Meghan presumes she can manipulate to her own ends. Her truth, as opposed to the truth.
One where she wasn't the victim, but the aggressor. And still, the palace kept quiet. They declined to publish the findings. Officially, the investigation was handled internally. Unofficially, there was pressure from all sides to let sleeping dogs lie. The Queen, frail and diplomatic to the end, allegedly wanted peace in her final years. Charles was newly crowned and cautious. William had other battles to fight, but that protective bubble, it's starting to burst. Because Meghan isn't letting it go. She keeps talking, reframing, throwing subtle jabs in podcast after podcast, and that calculated persistence is reportedly pushing the palace toward a different conclusion, that silence no longer serves them, that the public deserves to know what really happened behind those palace doors. And if the palace does publish even a fraction of what's in that report, the articles from Vanity Fair and The Hollywood Reporter will feel like a gentle warm-up act compared to what's coming next. It's the report Meghan hoped would vanish quietly into the royal archives. But behind the scenes, there's growing chatter that the bullying investigation, the one allegedly ordered by the late Queen herself, might not stay buried much longer. Insiders now claim that multiple senior aides, both current and former, are pressuring the palace to release it. Not out of revenge, but out of a need to set the record straight, because Meghan keeps talking. And every time she rewrites the story, those who live through it are watching her do it with clenched jaws. According to one source, the Queen was deeply troubled when she read the email that triggered the entire probe. The complaint allegedly came from Jason Knopf, the former press secretary, and detailed what he described as unacceptable treatment of palace staff.
Friend of the royal family, Hugo Vickers, who revealed the late Queen was so fearful of Harry and Meghan that she wouldn't want to be alone with them.
More concerning, he wasn't the only one. Others reportedly came forward, describing tearful breakdowns, harsh demands, and a toxic work environment that sent some fleeing in less than a year. One staffer allegedly claimed they were left shaken and broken after working under Meghan's command. The palace's response at the time was cautious, dignified. They opened a third-party review, quietly interviewed witnesses, and then, nothing. No summary, no press release, no consequence, just silence. Many assumed it was buried forever, that the royals would protect their own, even if it meant shielding a scandal. But that's not how insiders are talking now. What's changed? Well, according to multiple leaks, the contents of that report are far worse than anyone guessed. And more than that, it names names, not just Meghan, but also alleged enablers. It's said to include emails, witness accounts, and a timeline that directly contradicts several of Meghan's public statements. The concern isn't just reputational, it's legal. And that's why, sources say, the palace has waited until now. Because if Meghan keeps denying what happened and keeps publicly blaming others, the royal family may be forced to act, not with drama, not with emotion, but with cold, hard documentation, a page-by-page reckoning. And according to the latest whisper, that moment may already be scheduled. For Meghan Markle, controlling the narrative has always been her superpower. But then came that podcast, the one with British-born billionaire Emma Grede, and suddenly the carefully curated image began to wobble. On paper, it looked like a power move. A duchess turned business founder, sharing space with a self-made success story. But once the episode aired, something strange happened. Listeners weren't buying it. In fact, the opposite happened. Meghan came across not just unconvincing, but as one insider bluntly put it, completely out of her depth.
She used the word authentic 25 times in that interview, Meghan did, but there was nothing authentic about it.
The interview was supposed to be polished PR, but Emma, who grew up in East London and clawed her way into the upper echelon of global business, wasn't there to worship royalty. She was sharp, direct, and clearly unimpressed by vague talking points and authenticity platitudes. At one point, she asked Meghan if she'd rewrite her narrative. Meghan's answer? I'd ask people to tell the truth. A statement that immediately raised eyebrows, especially given the unreleased bullying report still looming over her head. That was just the beginning. Meghan stumbled through explanations of her so-called business ventures, including the now infamous jam line. She described gifting jars of preserves to friends who said they just made them so happy, to which one British critic fired back, Jam doesn't change lives, Meghan. It's toast topping. The tone-deaf anecdotes landed with a thud. And worse, Emma Grede, who built actual businesses from nothing, didn't hide her skepticism. Insiders say the palace was watching, and they weren't just amused, they were alarmed. Because when Meghan starts fumbling in public, it reflects back on the institution she used to represent, and her repeated attempts to present herself as a misunderstood mogul only reinforce the most damaging narrative that she is, above all else, performative. But this podcast wasn't just another awkward appearance, it may have been the final straw. Because when Meghan dismissed the bullying allegations yet again, while promoting luxury jam at $14 a jar, the royal family's inner circle reportedly decided enough was enough, and from that moment on, things started to move behind the scenes. The jam was supposed to be whimsical, a soft launch into lifestyle branding, but for many it became the punchline in a saga that's grown increasingly surreal.
You married into a monarchy. This isn't a brand collaboration. The truth? You had the chance to be timeless, except you chose to be trendy and fleeting.
Meghan Markle's attempt to reinvent herself as a gourmet entrepreneur via a $14 jar of fruit spread didn't just fall flat, it sparked something darker ridicule, and not just from tabloids, from former fans, respected commentators, and even insiders within her own shrinking circle. The term scam jam started trending almost instantly, not because the product was bad, though some critics claimed it was more syrup than spread, but because the branding felt desperate. People don't buy authenticity when it's manufactured, and Meghan's insistence that her jam made people happy was met with widespread eye rolls, especially when paired with the revelation that the entire business was inspired by texts from friends. No hard numbers, no market analysis, just vibes. And according to one source in the retail industry, this isn't a brand, it's a vanity project with a logo. Worse still, this wasn't a one-off. The jam rollout followed a string of stalled ventures, the lifestyle site that launched without launching, the tea brand rumors that went nowhere, the podcast reboot that died before its second season. Meghan was building an empire on thin air, and the cracks were showing. But what really pushed royal insiders over the edge wasn't the jam, it was the context. Because this bizarre fruit-based detour came after the damning exposés, after the staff complaints, and after Meghan had spent years framing herself as a social justice crusader. Suddenly she was hawking spreadable snacks while dodging serious questions about her conduct as a duchess. The optics were beyond tone-deaf. They were insulting, and sources say the palace, while silent on the surface, saw this pivot as a clear sign she's not taking anything seriously. One insider summed it up: she's pretending it's all behind her, like jam can erase the past, but it's not erased.
Yeah, and you know why she says nothing is a failure? You know, because nothing is a failure, because then you learn from the experience. That's because everything in her life is turning into a failure. Everything is failing.
Not even close. Because the next move Meghan made, firing her entire publicity team, only added gasoline to an already raging fire. When Meghan Markle quietly dismissed her entire publicity team, the headlines barely scratched the surface. Officially, it was a routine reshuffle, but insiders allege something far more chaotic was unfolding behind the scenes. According to multiple sources, the firing wasn't planned, it was emotional. A knee-jerk reaction to mounting bad press, plunging podcast numbers, and the public mockery of her lifestyle brand. Meghan, it seems, wasn't just frustrated, she was livid, and she wanted someone to blame. 6 publicists, all out, gone in a single sweep. And if you believe the whispers, some of them had been warning her for months that the messaging wasn't landing. They reportedly begged her to address the bullying allegations with humility, to acknowledge mistakes, or at the very least, stop making passive-aggressive podcast comments that seemed to mock the palace's silence. But Meghan didn't want strategy, she wanted vindication. And when she didn't get it, heads rolled. According to one former staffer, Meghan doesn't want crisis management, she wants applause. The firing sent a message, one that's been heard loud and clear across Hollywood PR firms: working for the Duchess is high risk, low reward. Because when the narrative breaks down, you're not the client's advisor, you're the scapegoat. And here's where it gets even messier. Insiders claim some of those fired staff members are now being quietly approached by media, by publishers, even by people with palace connections. Not all of them signed NDAs, not all of them left quietly. And if even one of them speaks up with receipts, Meghan's reputation rehabilitation tour could implode before it even begins. The palace, for its part, is reportedly monitoring these movements closely. They've stayed quiet for a reason, but they're not blind. and the moment a disgruntled former staffer corroborates what's in that buried investigation, the royals won't need to say a word. The story will write itself, but Meghan's problems don't end with publicists, because the next fracture is much closer to home, and it's starting to show in every photograph, every outing, and every whisper from Montecito.
Everything is failing. So she's quantifying that by saying, well, even though it's essentially she's saying, even though I've desperately failed, it's a success because I've learned from the experience. No, Meghan, you've just failed.
It's the one subject Meghan Markle's team never touches, the cracks in the marriage. But the whispers are growing louder, and this time they're not just coming from British tabloids. Even in Los Angeles, where the Sussexes were once royalty among royalty, the vibe has shifted. Sources claim Prince Harry has become increasingly withdrawn, frustrated by the relentless backlash, and according to one insider, absolutely exhausted by the PR circus. Some close to the couple allegedly believe he's beginning to question the cost of it all, not just to his reputation, but to his peace of mind. In public, they still pose for cameras when required, but behind the scenes, it's different. One source who worked with them briefly on a joint project claimed they barely spoke between takes. Another described the mood in their home as businesslike, like two executives stuck in the same company they can't afford to quit. And the root of the tension? It's not just about Meghan's scandals, it's about the dwindling empire they built together. Harry's memoir Spare burned more bridges than it built. His legal battles have made him a tabloid fixture for all the wrong reasons. His security fights in the UK, ongoing, expensive, and losing public sympathy fast. And then there's the fact that the British press, and increasingly the American press, treat him like a punchline. He left to escape the institution, only to find himself trapped in another one, brand Sussex. And according to one source close to his former circle, this isn't the life Harry thought he signed up for. Meanwhile, Meghan shows no sign of slowing down. She's launching wines, teasing beauty lines, and jumping on any podcast that will have her. But there's a catch. Her projects aren't landing. The buzz is fading. And worse, the pressure is rising. She needs Harry beside her, smiling, supportive, and selling the image. But lately it's starting to look like he's playing along, not because he believes in the brand, but because he doesn't know how to leave it. And if the distance between them keeps widening, the next public revelation may not be about the palace or the press. It might be about the Sussexes themselves. There's one final thread, holding the Sussex brand together, and it's fraying fast. Netflix. The massive multi-million-dollar deal that once seemed like a golden parachute now feels more like a ticking clock. Insiders say the streaming giant has grown restless, watching as Meghan and Harry's content underperforms, their public image crumbles, and their relevance slowly bleeds out.
And Meghan's just accepting all these compliments. I know I'm great, aren't I?
Please no.
That's all she did on that podcast.
Yeah.
Sort of like increasingly nodded her head. Oh yes, Meghan, you're so wonderful. Anyway.
The Arkwell docuseries gave them a temporary bump, but since then, silence. No breakout hit, no groundbreaking projects, just scattered rumors, endless delays, and now, according to a source inside the industry, a looming decision about whether the partnership is even worth salvaging. The stakes are higher than most people realize, because without Netflix, there's no guaranteed income, no global platform, no justification for the Sussexes to keep playing celebrity at a billionaire's level. And the palace knows this. One royal commentator put it bluntly. They're not afraid of Meghan and Harry. They're afraid of Meghan and Harry with a microphone and nothing left to lose. If the deal dissolves, what comes next could be devastating, not just for the monarchy, but for the couple themselves. According to Richard Fitzwilliams, a prominent royal analyst, the fear is that they'll go scorched earth, more attacks, more tell-alls, maybe even a second book from Harry or a bombshell podcast where Meghan finally names names. That's the scenario the palace is quietly preparing for. Because if Netflix pulls the plug, the Sussexes may decide to detonate whatever remains of their royal bridges in a last-ditch bid for attention and cash. But there's another scenario, one that insiders say is even more likely. If Netflix stays on, it may come with strings attached, creative control, PR conditions, even demands to shift public tone. In other words, Netflix might try to rebrand them entirely, and Meghan, who has fought so hard to own her narrative, may find herself answering to new handlers. Either way, the Sussexes are cornered. And when that Netflix decision drops, whether it's a renewal or a rejection, it will shape their next move, and everyone's bracing for impact. Because what happens next? That's when the palace strikes back. The palace isn't known for sudden moves. Its power lies in patience. Its silence is strategic. But make no mistake, something is coming. Insiders say the mood behind those gates has shifted. No more tolerance. No more letting Meghan control the conversation. This time it's the Crown preparing a countermove. And they're not aiming for headlines. They're preparing a blow that hits harder, deeper and longer than a press cycle ever could. So what is the major reveal insiders are whispering about?
Why can't she, for God's sake? What's wrong with her? The implication is clear. All the bad publicity the notoriously difficult Duchess gets, that ongoing avalanche of negative press, it's purely because the haters make up vile and hurtful fibs about her. Yeah, right.
Some claim it's a leak, a calculated release of excerpts from the long-buried bullying report. Others suggest it's a different kind of bombshell, private communications, unreleased footage, or according to one source, a detailed timeline that shows just how far the palace bent over backward before she turned on them. Still others believe it could come in the form of an unexpected ally, a former aide, a respected figure close to the late Queen, someone with credibility, someone who up until now has remained silent out of loyalty, but no longer feels bound to protect someone who has shown no loyalty in return. There's also chatter about the royals' inner PR network mobilizing in more subtle ways, placing quotes, reinforcing narratives, and reminding the public just how much grace Meghan was given before things turned sour. As one veteran royal watcher put it, when the monarchy fights back, it doesn't scream, it seeps, and it never misses. And let's not forget, William and Catherine have had enough. Behind their composed smiles, there's real anger. Meghan's jabs have always landed hardest on them. The racism insinuations, the coldness claims, the media attacks, the documentary, Spare, and still, they said nothing. But insiders believe they're done with damage control. They want clarity, they want closure, and if the only way to get that is by allowing the truth to emerge, then so be it. This isn't revenge, it's preservation. And if the palace really is preparing to pull the trigger, then the narrative Meghan Markle has clung to for years could collapse overnight. Because once the institution starts talking, it never stops. For Meghan Markle, it's always been about the image, the branding, the curated vulnerability dressed up as empowerment. But this week marks a turning point, and possibly the beginning of the end. With business ventures collapsing, a marriage visibly strained, public sympathy fading, and the palace allegedly preparing to break its silence, Meghan is facing something far more threatening than bad press. She's facing a reckoning. Not just from the media, from the very institution she spent years trying to outmaneuver. And here's the twist. This time she may have no control. The story isn't hers anymore. Because for all the interviews, the glossy documentaries, the heartfelt podcasts, and the curated aesthetics, none of it will matter if the palace drops what insiders claim is coming. The buried report, the internal emails, the quiet testimonies from people who've kept their heads down while their names were dragged through the mud. If any of it sees the light of day, it won't just challenge Meghan's narrative, it could obliterate it. There's a reason her defenders have gone quiet. The Hollywood elite that once embraced her, now silent. The brand deals she teased, stalled. The second chances she's always counted on, drying up. Even her latest rosé launch, while polished and Instagram-ready, was met with more side-eyes than support. People aren't listening the way they used to. They're watching, and what they're seeing is a woman frantically spinning plates, while the floor beneath her buckles. But maybe the most damning sign of all is this: the palace isn't rushing. They're waiting, and that should terrify her more than anything. Because when a centuries-old institution decides to act, it does so with precision and permanence. Meghan pushed and pushed, assuming the silence meant submission. What she may be realizing now is that it meant strategy. So here we are. The week insiders say it could all begin. The week Meghan Markle may finally meet the one force she can't manipulate, outshine, or outrun: the truth. Not her truth, the truth. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think the palace will go public? And if they do, how much damage could it really cause? Like, subscribe, and stay tuned. The next video on your screen is waiting. And trust me, you won't believe what's coming next.